one of the most fundamental questions, right, that you sort of have to answer before you keep discussing these things is something like, does God exist? Well, there's two possibilities to that question. If I say, does God exist, there's a yes and there's a no answer to that question, right? If you answer no over here, so you take this fork in the road, you end up with a position that's called atheism. That's the technical term for saying that God does not exist. If you answer yes, then you're at the next question. Now you have to ask the question, is it a person? Because even if you say, look, God exists, by the way, it's not a given that you now all of a sudden know what the hell you're talking about. So the fact that God exists, for instance, if I can say, that a mountain exists, but it doesn't necessarily specify what kind of mountain on it. My commitment to there being a mountain doesn't tell me whether or not there's snow on it or how high it is, right? The fact that you commit yourself to the existence of a thing, that just says that thing exists. It doesn't say much about the thing itself. So the next question to ask is it a person? And again, if you frame the question that way, then there's two possibilities. There's yes, it's a person, or no, it's not a person. If you answer no, if you ask the question, is God a person, and you answer no, then you end up with a position called deism. Deism believes in the existence of God, but doesn't understand God as any kind of person, some sort of cosmic force, if you will, or the thing that triggered the Big Bang, but then didn't really get involved in our lives, right? Deism is a position where if you're a deist, it's not like you can pray to God. It's not like God cares about whether or not, you're going to get good grades, or, your girlfriend's going to stay with you or dump you or anything like that. You can't pray to a deist God, because God is not a person. It's something else. Whatever that is, I don't know, but not person. Deism, yes, God exists. So yes to the first question, no to the second question, you end up with deism. Yes to the first question, no to the first question, you end up with atheism. Obviously, atheism doesn't even begin to ask the question whether or not it's a person, because there's no such thing to talk about to begin with. Suppose you answer yes, it is a person. You still have to clarify, is there more than one? Like, it's not a given that because God's a person that there's like one of them. It could be more, right? If you answer that there's more than one God, then that's polytheism. The poly means many, theism means God, polytheism. So you end up with a view, and polytheism, by the way, is reflected in certain world religions. Hinduism, for instance, is a polytheistic religion, but polytheism is a term of philosophy. It doesn't pick out Hinduism, it picks out the following answers. Yes, God exists. Yes, God is a person. And yes, there's more than one. And then you end up with polytheism. If you answer, yes, God exists. Yes, God is a person. But no, there's not more than one person. So you ask this question, is there more than one? Right? You still have to ask another question. Is she all loving? So now there's only one person. Well, you want to ask, is she all loving? And again, there's a yes or no possibilities to that. If you say that, yes, she is all loving, then you end up with classical monotheism. So look, it's monotheism. That means one person. Theism means belief in God, right? Just as atheism means no theism. The A is like, says no, right? It's like saying no theism. That's what atheism is, right? Monotheism says yes to theism, one as opposed to poly, right? And you end up with classical monotheism. If you, for instance, say, is she all loving, and you answer no, then you end up, and this is where we're going to be with, for instance, among other things, the evil God hypothesis, right? And that's where we're going to be with our reading today. So notice that if our reading is over here, that's what we're about to read, there's all of these things that it presupposes. And remember, at each bifurcation, you have to justify what you say. This isn't a buffet where you get to choose the food you like. It's like, oh, I'm going to go for left, right, left, right, left. It's like, kyung, why? Why? Each one of these, you need an argument. So if you're going to say, okay, God exists, fair enough. You want to go this way. Why? You owe me an argument. You're going to say God is a person. And I'm going to say, no, God's not a person. I owe you an argument. You're going to say, yes, you owe me an argument. I want reasons. For each one of these, there's an argument diagram to be made, right? For all of the whys that you see on the screen right now, that's an argument that needs to be made, and it's an argument that better be good and that better use true premises and actually support its conclusion. So there's all of this philosophical work that needs to be done. So you're not off the hook, right? I'm not tracking your preferences. What's your favorite color? Do you like this or do you like that? Do you like sushi? What's your favorite car? It's like, that's not what's going on. These are all things that have to be justified. And importantly, the text that we're going to be looking at, right, presupposes this entire path over here. So presumably we'd have a lot of work to get there. We're not going to do it, right? The text we're going to look at presupposes that God exists. So that's never going to come into question. Presupposes that God is a person, presupposes that there's only one, and then is going to ask the question, this one God that does exist and is a person, is she all loving? And then is going to ask this question, yes or no, and look at why. And the theodicies are ways of reconciling, when you say here classical monotheism, reconciling the idea that we see suffering around us, right? How can that be compatible with the idea that God is all loving? And the evil God hypothesis is going to be a critique of these theodicies. So just to set up here, just to see everything that we're sort of, all the presuppositions that are there. And notice, if something happens at the end of our philosophical deliberation and we're not happy, we can always backtrack. Beep, 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 like a bus, you know. You can backtrack, and you can backtrack all the way to here and decide to go there instead. So that would be deism, right? There's different ways you can backtrack. Kind of like when we went back to the drawing board and we said, well, these concepts aren't compatible. We can go back and you can decide to backtrack all the way, for instance, all the way here and say, well, I'm just going to end up going in this direction. And again, you can't just do that just because. You got to give me reasons. Right? But you can backtrack in all sorts of directions. So that's the topography we have right now. That's the state of play. And we're just going to be concerned with one sort of more sophisticated outgrowth of that. So let's do our reading. And before we do, we want to remember what we learned from philosophy of science. Remember when we did Popper in philosophy of science? At the end, I said, what should philosophy take away from this account? So Popper's idea that, you know, science ought to be falsifiable, and that means conceiving a situation where a claim could be shown wrong. And I said that in philosophy, you should always state the conditions under which you're prepared to admit that you are wrong. And that's what characterizes us philosophers. So if you're not ready to change your mind about anything, you're doing something, but you're not doing philosophy. So as we read this kind of stuff, I don't really care what your personal convictions are, quote unquote, but as far as philosophy is concerned, there have to be conditions under which a given claim is shown wrong. Otherwise, why should anyone take it seriously?